I do want to introduce our next guest, and that is Sarah Payton, and her book is Your Resident Self Workbook, and from self-sabotage to self-care. She is a constellation facilitator in the world, and at least Constells, I'm going to find out a little bit more about this because it's really what our brain does. And so many people have family things in their life that really kind of keep going down into each one of our generations. So we're going to talk a little bit of Sarah. I'm excited to learn more about this, how our brain works. And Sarah Payton, are you there?
I'm right here. It's wonderful to be with you.
Well, thank you so much. I've never heard of this before. And you say you're the only one in the facilitator in the world that does this, correct?
Well, there are lots of folks who study with me and take it out into the world, too, because it's so fun and effective.
How did you get into this?
I got into this. It's kind of a sad story, but still quite beautiful. I have a son who died of addiction. And I just wanted to find some way to help him with the trauma that he had lived through that was at the root of the addiction. I was not able to save him, but the work that I did took me into traveling all over the world and helping other folks. So it's turned out to be very beautiful and joyful, and I just always think of him with so much love.
Oh, that's beautiful in a sad way, So thank you for sharing that. So tell us a little bit about yourself. How long have you been doing this?
I published the first book when I was in 2019, and then I had started writing it when I was 50, and it came out of just this work of talking to people about why their brains do what they do. Why the heck do our brains do what we do? Why do we self-sabotage? Turns out we make perfect sense. We're trying to solve brain problems with our self-sabotage, which seems slightly counterintuitive.
Right.
But once we get into the depths of it, we go, oh, no wonder alcohol has been my friend. It's the most effective substance that we have as humans to limit shame. Thank goodness for it, and maybe I don't need it quite as much as I needed it before. It's like there's an exploration and a self-compassion that comes from learning about why our brains do what they do.
Wow, very interesting. So let me ask you, do you think that it is something that is handed down to us?
Well, everything, it turns out, there used to be that big debate, nature versus nurture. Did it get handed down to us, or did it come as a result of environmental experience? And everything, it turns out, is both nature and nurture, that everything is both handed down to us and a result of what we've lived through in this life. All kinds of interesting stuff is coming out about epigenetics and the way that genocide, for example, affects grandchildren of people who have survived genocide. There are so many elements to our lives that when we start to learn about them, begin to make sense of big patterns that we've lived through.
Very interesting. So when you work with somebody, what does that look like?
Well, when I work with people, I'm often doing it kind of in the fishbowl as part of a demo, because I mostly teach big classes on how the brain works. So when I'm working with somebody, they'll say, "Oh, I have this problem. I can't forgive my mom. My mom was really extremely scary and violent, and I walk around and I obsess about being angry at her all the time, and I don't want to do that anymore." And so we take a look at how are we solving brain problems with our emotions, and it's this funny sort of patchwork of the ways that we can feel emotion and the ways that we haven't been encouraged to feel emotion. Some people can feel rage. Some people do not permit themselves rage. If we have rage but we don't permit it to ourselves, then we end up like in a fight with ourselves the whole time, and that can be why we never forgive somebody, because we never got to go, well, of course I'm angry. And when we
Right,
say, of
right.
course I'm angry, then it gets to move instead of being stuck in our fight with ourselves.
So, Sarah, and I do want to remind any of our listeners that are just waking up with us, starting your day in a positive way. We're talking with Sarah Payton. How many books do you have?
I have 2 books out. I have the Your Resonant Self book, and then I have the Your Resonant Self workbook.
Okay. So is this something that our listeners and all, I guess we would work ourselves through the workbook?
Yes. It's
Okay.
meant as a do-it-yourself guide to making your
Okay.
brain a better place to live.
Okay, great. And so what are some of the steps that you can share with us that would, be helpful?
Well, one of the most important steps is to begin to realize that there are different parts of the brain that do different things, and that all of us have the brain territory that lets us be warm with ourselves. Everybody's got it. We don't, people say, be nice to yourself, be kind to yourself, and you're like, yeah, sure, how do I do that? I mean, I've been at doctors and they would say, you have to be less stressed.
Yeah,
Like, you come live in
exactly.
my life. You tell me how I'm going to be less stressed given the life that I've got to live and the people that I want to take care of here. I've left doctor's offices. It's a little sad, but I've left doctor's offices in tears, wondering
No,
how the heck am I going to
when
have
you're
less stress?
right, because when you're going through trauma, and this last year and a half has been major trauma for people, very unknown. Do I get a vaccination? Do I not? Do I, go to work? Do I have a job? There's just so many unknowns, and that in itself is very trauma making. Do you agree?
I agree completely. I think that we're going to be seeing the after effects of this pandemic for probably a couple of generations.
How did you learn this? What were you doing before 2019?
Before 2019, I was used and rare book dealer.
Yeah. Okay.
And of course I was trying to hopefully, I was really wanting to do something for my son. Nobody had this book out, nobody had from the standpoint of just a regular person trying to go through life, learning about the brain, how does it make things better for me? Nobody had written that. People had written books for neuroscientists and books for therapists, and the people who wrote were doctors, and the people who wrote were therapists, and nobody was just like a regular person moving through the world going, okay, here's all this really interesting information that actually is helpful, and how can we integrate it if we don't have a neuroscience researcher background? And so I started to write. And then one of my friends contacted Norton and said, Sarah's got a book. And Norton was really excited and they loved the book. And then there was this interesting moment where they discovered that I didn't have a degree. And they were like, oh my God, how are we going to publish you? You don't have a degree. And so they actually had a PhD review my material so that it would be sure to be in order. But it was such an interesting experience just to be a regular person going, how can we use what we're learning about the brain?
Congratulations. This is huge. This is like reaching a goal and a dream, and through basically your son. How old was your son, if you don't mind me asking?
He was 33 when he died.
Yeah. And he had suffered with anxiety and depression.
Yeah, we got to adopt him. He was a kid who was on the street, and my sweet husband, built a room for him in our downstairs. We just had a 1-bedroom house, but we had an unfinished basement. My husband went downstairs and built a room for him. He came to live with us. Yeah, we loved him so much, and then we did lose him to the trauma, but I didn't want to. Yeah.
Obviously, yeah. Now I'm looking on your website, and you actually share practitioners that you work with, correct?
Yeah, people who have studied with me. Yeah. You can find me on my website, but you can also find people who cost less than me and are there, who've studied with me and work with me all the time. Yeah.
Wow. And so these people, these practitioners, all work with people that are suffering from depression or anxiety and that kind of thing?
Yeah, and from PTSD. Yeah, yeah.
And where are you located?
I'm physically located in Portland, very close to Portland, Oregon, in Vancouver,
Okay.
Washington. But
Okay.
in this world of Zoom, I'm available.
You could be
My
anywhere.
classes
Isn't
are
that
available all
amazing?
over the
I know.
world.
I love it. I love
Yeah.
it. Wow. So give us a couple tips of daily
Mm-hmm.
things that we can do to make our life a little bit easier.
Sure. Research shows that if we use our own names when we're having warmth for ourselves, that it helps the brain to differentiate from the part that can have warmth for ourselves from the part that's having the emotional difficulty. So if we start to say, okay, I'm having emotional difficulty, but that's not all of me, that's just a part of me, and we stand kind of in the part of ourselves that like has compassion for, like, of course you're stressed, like leaving that doctor's office, right? To stand in the part of myself and go, Sarah, using my own name, of course you're stressed. Of course you're having the experience that you're having. I can even in retrospect, if I imagine myself standing there with the Sarah who left the doctor's office, I can imagine my shoulders coming down from around my ears. I can imagine relaxing. I can imagine, saying, oh, thank goodness somebody understands. Like, what if the doctor said, of course you're stressed. We'd love it if you were a little less stressed, but of course you're stressed given what you're dealing with. And, I'd like to recommend maybe just a little meditation,
Right.
Something.
And you talk about,
so then there's this sort of kindness that starts to enter the dialogue. Instead of, Sarah, why are you so stupid, which is
right.
more what I started with before I started doing all this work.
That's interesting. And how you just, I mean, like you have different classes. Like I talked to you during the week and you had 100 people that you were speaking with, correct?
Yeah, I just got off a class on Zoom with 100 people in it who are going through the workbook with me and taking a look at all the different processes. Yeah.
Wow. So this is worldwide that you can help people. And are they usually the ones stressing or are they there for their children? What are the scenarios?
They're there both for themselves and for their children. Sometimes people are there for their spouses or their best friends or their moms. People, we love each other so much. We don't even realize how much we love each other and want each other's well-being.
And how we take on other people's traumas, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. Oh. How do we find your book and tell us a little bit more about what we're going to find in your book?
Yeah, you can get my book on any online bookseller, or you can have your brick and mortar store order it. Your Resonant Self by Sarah Payton, and Your Resonant Self workbook by Sarah Payton. And you'll find in it like a self-guided tour to your own brain, and some very lots of exercises and meditations to be able to work with to start to change the inside of your own brain so that it becomes a nice place to live.
Wow. Wow, very interesting. And let me ask you, how long does it usually take before you start to feel differently?
People who are doing the meditations every day notice, and the meditations are for free download on yourresonantself.com. The people who are working with the meditations every day notice a huge change at about 5 months. There starts to be a big change, and another bump at 8 months, and another bump at a year, and another bump at 3 years, and another bump at 5 years, and another bump at 10 years. We've been working long enough to start to see these kinds of ways that things change for brains.
Right. And you didn't have the knowledge when your son was alive at this time, right?
No, I didn't.
And do you deal with a lot of adolescents?
I deal with anybody who comes.
Okay.
And so, anyone who stumbles across the work and enjoys the brain and enjoys learning and wants their brain to be a better place to live. Adolescents, people who are in their 80s, people who are in their 50s.
What do you think people's biggest struggle is?
I think people's biggest struggle is that we live in a world where we don't really know how to just be warm with each other. We always want to fix each other. We don't know how to stand beside ourselves and beside other people and say, of course. We never pause for that moment of connection and acknowledgement and respect.
Wow. That's interesting. I love it. Leave us with one moment.
Sure.
Something that you can learn.
Yes, here's the one thing, and that is that if your brain is being cruel to you, it's not truth, it's trauma.
Whoa, you just gave me chills.
Yeah.
That's incredible right there. Wow. I love what you're doing, Sarah Payton. And of course, tell everybody your book one more time.
Your Resonant Self, Sarah Payton. Sarah with an H, Payton, like Peyton Manning, sarahpayton.com.
There you go. In fact, Sarah, would you send me a book to give away to a listener that calls in right now?
Absolutely. It's on its way to you.
That would be great. And again, I want to give out our phone number, 805-419-0008, 419-0008. Sarah Payton, thank you so much. Please download our podcast and share our show with everyone. We are at the end of our show and some really good messages out there. I hope that you enjoyed it. And of course, you've been listening to the Kim Pagano Show, The Brighter Side of Life.